Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone who has joined this webinar. Warm welcome to the webinar on Australia TGA CERs. So we have two wonderful panelists today. First is Arun Sudash. Arun has been with SARACA Solutions for long. He is a regulatory and clinical expert. He has worked on many regulatory markets, including EU MDR, MDD previously, Australia TGA, Japanese regulation, China FDA, and many more. Today we will have opportunity to hear his expertise on Australia TGA CERs. And another panelist is Samuel Wade. He is a veteran in medical device regulatory and quality. He has been in medical devices for almost 40 years. He have had very good run with many large corporations and have helped set up quality and regulatory teams of hundreds of resources. So with this quick introduction, Sam, I am handing it over to you. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar on Australia's TGA, the CERs, the gap analysis, and the differences with the European Union MDR and CER. Today's agenda will cover international standards and guidelines, demonstrating substantial equivalence of your device, the requirements of post-market data and post-market surveillance, CEP requirements, CER update frequency, and device classification. The evaluators and clinical expert qualifications, and the differences in applicable EPs to GSPRs for the CER requirements. From an international standpoint and guidelines, the TGA CER is somewhat different than the EU MDR in that the clinical evidence guidelines are promulgated by ARGMD, medical device version 1.0, promulgated in 2017. The therapeutic goods medical device regulations, promulgated in 2002. And the International Medical Device Regulators Forum guidelines, the clinical evaluation, which was promulgated in 2019, and the MedDev Guide for Manufacturers and Notified Bodies for Clinical Evaluation, released in June 2016, with also a heavy dose of ISO 14971 and the application of risk management to medical devices. The EU MDR CER is regulated by the MedDev 2.7 Clinical Evaluation, a Guide for Manufacturers and Notified Bodies under Directives 9342 EEC and 9384 EEC. The Medical Device Regulation, promulgated in 2017, MDCG 2020-5 Clinical Evaluation, and the MDCG 2020-6. Arun, if you could explain the differences between the MDCG and the IMDRF, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure, Sam. Let me tell you that IMDRF is the everybody knows about that GHTF, that Global Harmonizing Task Force Standards. So earlier, that GSPRs has released many standards to do those harmonized standards to harmonize the regulations around the world. So now it's being changed over to IMDRF. So now International Medical Device Regulatory Forum is releasing different regulation, different guidelines for harmonized guidelines and harmonized standards for all over the world, so everyone can follow those things. So TGA and this IMDRF is very much acceptable for MD-CEP requirements. So everybody, you know that MD-CEP requirement is very much necessary in the 5 countries. So those MD-CEP requirement, you need to follow these IMDRF regulations and guidelines. So TGA is also one of the country inside that was in MD-CEP. Hence, TGA is also referring to IMDRF regulations. In the same time, where EU MDR that 2017-745, when it's called a standalone regulation. Earlier it was a directive, but now it's been a regulation. Hence, the regulation requirement is already it tells you, like European Union tells that it contains each and every requirements inside the MDR regulation. But when subsequently now when the manufacturers are trying to comply with the requirements of MDR, they face difficulties. There are few gaps are there. There are very minor gaps are there, but due to those gaps, the manufacturers are finding difficulties in complying the requirements of MDR. Like there is no requirement inside MDR. There is no clear indication that what would be the update period for a clinical evaluation report. So hence, what the European Union now they are doing, that they are releasing MDCG guidelines. So these MDCG guidelines, one has been released on May 2020 this year. Again, there is another MDCG guideline came into effect on June 2020. So in these MDCG guidelines, the European Union tells that for some of the gaps, like there are few things where each and everything the MDR regulation is not capable to cover all the requirements. Hence, in some places you can still refer to the MedDev 2.7.1 Rep 4 for the if there are any requirements are still there. Hence, like for update, CER update, I can give you example. The CER update, you can refer to MedDev 2.7.1 Rep 4 in the place of directly MDR. Because inside the MDR regulation 2017-745, it's nowhere it's mentioned that you need to refer that MedDev 2.7.1 Rep 4 for the clinical evaluation. So hence, this MDCG guidelines are helping you in this phase that you can refer the MedDev 2.7.1 Rep 4 for the clinical evidence reports, clinical evaluation reports.
Excellent, thank you. The next topic is demonstrating substantial equivalence. There's quite a bit of difference here between the two. Substantial equivalence under the TGA is defined as the predicate or similar marketed device may be considered substantially equivalent to the device if the difference should not have any adverse impact on safety and performance. The predicate is a previous iteration of the device within the same lineage of devices with the same intended purpose and from the same manufacturer. A similar marketed device is one that's an existing marketed device with a similar structure and design and the same intended purpose as the device, but not a predicate of the device. Such a device may not be manufactured by the same manufacturer, and therein lies a huge difference. In the EU, a device is designed by the modification of device already marketed by the same manufacturer, or a manufacturer of a device demonstrated to be equivalent to an already marketed device not manufactured by him or her. Then the two manufacturers have a contract in place that explicitly allows the manufacturer of the second device full access to the technical documentation on an ongoing basis. That's a tremendous hurdle to overcome when you have competing companies. Arun, I'd like to have you talk a little bit more about demonstrating substantial equivalence and the difference between similar marketed device and an already marketed device. Arun?
Yeah, sure, Sam. So Sam has explained it very in an excellent manner. So let me add something it too. we have tried to differentiate into like same category. So if we are talking TGA is only talking like substantial equivalence, whereas the MDR is tells you that equivalent device. So the terminology is the terminology is quite different. Like here we can call this substantial equivalent, here you can call this equivalent device. So what substantial equivalence device is consist of predicate as well as similar marketed device. So predicate is the same device, is a device of a same manufacturer, which may be a iteration of your previous device, means a device which is already in the market and you have done any modification, then you again launching that same device, the modified device in the market. Then you can take the earlier predicate device as a predicate one, as a substantial equivalence. And also in the same time, you can also take a similar marketed device as a substantial equivalent device in TGA. So here comes the difference. For TGA, you can take any existing marketed device, whichever around the world. If any device is marketed around the world, you can take that device. If that device clinical indication is same and biologically and technically you can demonstrate the equivalent, then you can just take that similar marketed device as a substantial equivalence for your subject device. But in MDR, you cannot do this. In MDR, the predicate also you can demonstrate equivalence to the predicate one. Means if you have a device and you have just modified that device and you are launching that modified device, then you can take the equivalent device, the earlier device, as a equivalent device in MDR. But if a similar marketed device that was manufactured by a other manufacturer, then you cannot simply justify the clinical, technological and biological equivalence. You cannot just justify the equivalence and just take that device as a equivalent. At that time, you need to have a agreement. You need to have an agreement with that other manufacturer so that you can access the technical documentation of the other device of the other manufacturer. So that is the very big difference here in this demonstration of substantial equivalence. So Sam.
Thank you, Arun. The next slide.
Sam, if you allow, I would like to add just one quick thing on this substantial equivalence. I think both of you have done a great job in explaining. And I think to our audience here, this has been a very challenging explanation lately with a lot of our customers. We have done almost 200 CERs in last few years, combining MDD, MDR, and TGA. It has been a challenge to explain and forget about smaller size companies. We had challenges to explain this to larger size companies. And many people who have not understood it correctly, they thought that notified bodies will still accept the predicate device of the computation, but they have been rejected. We have seen many tech files and the CRs which have been rejected, which did not have right equivalent device. So our suggestion would be that you make a good judgment of the predicate device, have some sort of a collaboration with some of your partners or competition in some ways if you want to remain in the market. Otherwise, there is a fair chance that if you do not have a right equivalent device, there is a good chance that you may not have your device in the market beyond May 2021. We had a couple of cases on this with our customers. We did explain them upfront. Some understood well, and I think they're doing fairly well, but some had challenging understanding. So my recommendation would be that you read the regulation well, understand it really well, and also look at what is happening in the market. This is not something new. It has been there in market for a couple of years now, but still we are wondering that many people find it really hard to find it correctly. And that's one of the reason, a couple of our customers are moving to Australia to have some clinical history, because, TGA still allows to have a predicate of your computation or other devices. So that could be another route which quite a few people are following, to have certain history of a device where you do not have a predicate in Europe. Over to you, Sam.
Thank you. That was a very good explanation. And I know for some companies it'll be very difficult to get a CER in the EU without clinical experience. And it used to be, yeah, and this allows you to, using Australia does allow you to gain that experience. The next slide, we will be talking about post-market surveillance and the differences between the two. The TGA has no specific requirements for the PMCF, unlike the EU. The PMS in the EU contains a detailed PMCF requirements, and the TGA requires data from clinical experience, generally post-market data, can support the substantiation of the safety and performance claims of the device, help in identifying the risk and guide risk and risk management plans and assessment. A dedicated Annex 9 Part B for PMCF requirements has been added to the regulation in the EU in 2017. And this specifically talks about proactively collecting and reviewing experience gained from devices placed in the market. This really means that you can't just use your vigilance and your complaint data and do your analysis of that. This means you have to use all kinds of outside and other resources to gain experience proactively. That includes doing literature searches, and I mean well-defined literature searches done against a protocol using many databases. It means that you may have to go out and do surveys of your customers. It means you may have to go out and go to professional meetings and do interviews with some of your users, or alternatively, visit your users on site. It may mean going back to your data being produced by your production to see if any of your production items are faults or findings or rejects are making it through to the field and creating problems. So that's another source of data. The CER should include a summary of the clinical data in TGA related to post-market data available for the device under evaluation and for the substantially equivalent device. In the EU, all the PMCF findings should be analyzed, and the results should be documented in a PMCF evaluation report, which will be part of the CER and technical documentation. If you'd like to elaborate somewhat on this, Arun, this would be great. On the contents of the
so here there is another very important difference came into effect. Like Kuldeep and Sam explained you in a really very good manner about why people have choose this TGA route instead of EU MDR, instead of European Union. This is another reason that why people choose this TGA route instead of they are launching in the European market. So in TGA, you need not to have a specific PMCF. There is no specific requirement for PMCF for a TGA inside TGA regulation or TGA guidelines. You can have only your post-market data. So the post-market data only contains like those vigilance data, your investigation, your recalls, or any FSCS, field safety corrective action or cancellations, or any registry data. You can just review the registries, government registry, or your own company's registries, or you can do a literature report, literature survey to find out the complaints. If there are any complaints inside any literature, then you can prepare a post-market, then you can evaluate all those post-market data, then you can create a report that can support the clinical evaluation report as a post-market data. By which you can complete the clinical evaluation and you can go for the approval of a CER or tech file. But when it comes to MDR, Earlier also I can tell you, like in MDD and directive, there is no very stringent requirement. It's not very critical or stringent requirement for a PMCF. You need to have a PMCF. Like there is no such specific requirement in there is no such stringent requirement in MDD. But now in MDR, this new MDR regulation 2017-745, there is a dedicated section, there is a dedicated annexure, part of annexure has been added, that is only for PMCF. And in comparison to earlier directive, in earlier directive there is a wider scope in which you can avoid the PMCF, you can avoid the post-market clinical follow-up. There is a wider scope, but in MDR the scope has been reduced, and it is being very difficult to justify that why a PMCF is not required for your subject device. So most of the cases, it's been a PMCF is required in most of the cases, like all of the high risk device or novel devices. You need to have a PMCF report in place to get the approval for a clinical evaluation report. So like PMCF, all the main findings, then after PMCF report, then you can again need to create a PMS or PSUR report. From the PMCF, you can get the all main findings from the PMCF. Those can be an input for your PMS plan. So by that PMS plan, you can further create your post-market surveillance or periodic safety update report, so that that will be a part of a technical file.
Very good, thank you. That was a very good explanation. Our next slide is going to be talking about the CEP requirements, CER update, and classification and differences between the two jurisdictions. The CEP requirements for TGA's clinical evaluation protocol is necessary for a systemic literature review requirements of safety and performance and the state-of-the-art search, which is similar to the CEP requirements in which for the EU MDR, in which the regulation 2017 contains a detailed clinical evaluation plan requirements. A dedicated section in its annexure, Annex 9 Part A, for clinical evaluation plan requirements has been added to the regulation. The CER update in the TGA, as a minimum, the CER should be updated every 1 to 5 years, depending upon the novelty of the device and risk as per MedDev 2.7 revision 4. It's a little different in the EU, where the clinical evaluation and its documents shall be updated throughout the life cycle of the device concerned with clinical data obtained from the implementation of the manufacturer's post-market surveillance and PMCF plan. If the device carries significant risk or is not yet well established, you're required to do it annually. And that requirement also follows through in the TGA, which states that the device carries significant risk or is not yet well established, you're required to update it at least annually. And they're very similar in both jurisdictions, where if it carries significant risk and is well established, then you need to update every 2 to 5 years. The TGA has a slight difference in device classifications from those of EU. There's class 1M, 1S, 2A, 2B, 3, and active implantable. In the EU, it's class 1, class 2A, class 2B, class 3. Whereas class 1 is the low risk and class 3 is the high risk. I'm going to let Arun go into some of the differences between the systemic literature, systematic literature searches required, and the device classifications in more detail. Arun?
Yes, sure, Shem. Whenever you see that CEP term, it's like same in both MDR and TGA. So in TGA also it's a CEP, and MDR is a CEP. But the difference is very vast. Means where a clinical evaluation protocol is necessary to do a systematic literature review. So it's only necessary for the systematic literature review requirement. Means in a clinical evaluation protocol, you need to have only the process, only the requirement which define how you are going to do the literature review, how you are going to appraise those articles, how you can do the analysis of those articles. So those requirements you need to have inside the clinical evaluation protocol, which need to be developed for TGA CER. But when you came to MDR, so in MDR, you need to have a proper clinical evaluation plan. So when I tells you that plan, there is a dedicated section. There is a dedicated section 1A of XIV part A that was completely for clinical evaluation plan requirements. So all those requirements you need to address in the clinical evaluation plan. So nowadays, like in clinical evaluation plan, you need to address the device description, all the details of a packaging insert like contradiction, warnings, cautions, precautions. Each thing you need to define inside the clinical evaluation plan. There should be a clear purpose and scope inside the clinical evaluation plan. You need to address the risk management reports and how you are doing the risk management, risk analysis or risk assessment. You need to define the plan over there so that you can describe those risk benefit analysis details. You can describe those in the report, but in the plan you need to list all those residual risks and your risk management plan, risk management report, then user training related reports, user training related data. You need to list all the things which you are going to define in the clinical evaluation report. You need to list all the requirements inside the clinical evaluation plan, like claims and insert packaging, insert data, each and everything inside the clinical evaluation plan. So the plan is like clinical evaluation plan. You can estimate it can be like 70 to 75, 80 pages of document. Whereas the clinical evaluation protocol, it can be like 5 to 10 pages of document. So you can see the differences here. Then I came into device classification. So device classification for TGA, there is a very less difference. That in TGA it divided the class 1 into two categories, like class 1M and class 1S. So whatever the devices which has measuring function, if there is a function which used for measurement of your device or something else, it does any measuring function, then it comes into the class 1M category. And if any devices of class 1, like lower risk devices, are going with sterile condition, then those devices are coming in class 1S. Means those class 1S has a little bit higher risk than the usually the class 1 only class 1 devices has. So the class 1S a little bit higher risk in comparison to the regular class 1 devices. Then class 2A, class 2B, and class 3. Then again TGA put the active implantable, the AIMD devices on the highest risk, above the class 3 risks. So that is the other difference in TGA. But in MDR, EU MDR CER, so I think you all knows, like class 1, class 2A, class 2B, class 3, there is a gradual increment of risk. And there is a class 1, you can for reusable devices, you can use the 1R, that is class 1R devices for any reusable instruments or reusable devices.
Very good. I just want to point out that you keep seeing the name risk throughout all of our documents and all the documentation. It appears that risk management is here to stay and keeps growing into every corner of medical device regulation, no matter what jurisdiction you're under. Moving on.
If you allow me, Sam, if you allow me, I would like to just add a few things on this slide.
Sure.
I think this is a very important slide, and for all of our audiences to remember that there is a huge difference between CEP, Clinical Evaluation Plan, and Clinical Evaluation Protocol, which I think Arun explained really well. 3 years ago, it used to be 6 pages document. Now it is 60 pages. And in some of our customers, it has gone to almost 100 pages. So I would like all of you to pay attention to CEP, be more concerned about CEP, because it is your plan. You have to have a plan, then you will do the report. It is not just a document or just an agenda document. It needs the full description of the items which Arun described. So I think I would be here to pay attention. Another very important point and a question we always ask from our customers about CR update. When do we really update our CR? I think there is a good guideline. There is no very clear guideline. Obviously, you have boundaries, but I think the best assessment is with you. As Sam pointed out, that you will see a risk, and risk is always a critical thing in medical device development. You have to assess the risk of your device, and if you see it's on the higher side, it's always better to update faster. As soon as you get your field updates, you're getting complaints, you are going out in the market doing PMCF, right? You're getting certain feedback, which triggers that you will have to update your DFIMA, PFIMA, or software FMEA. And as soon as you do those updates, you need to come back and see if anything has changed in your CR or CP. So the best assessment is with you. Faster updates are better to ensure that our intention as a company is to make sure that whenever your tech file, STED or CEP or CR goes to auditor, it has to approve. We are not leaving any stone unturned in any kind of documentation we do for customers. We do recommend, we do suggest them whatever is best with no compromise on anything, so that you don't have any surprises at the end. Over to you, Sam.
Yeah, I'd like to just follow up a little bit on risk. As I said earlier, risk is making its way into everything. And risk analysis that you do for your device to be included in the technical documentation, whether it be here in the United States, in the EU, in the TGA, or whatever jurisdiction you're going to market in. Risk analysis is no longer something that you do once during your design phase and then put up on a shelf and expect it to be current. Every time that you have a new complaint or a new use for your device, you have to go back and reevaluate that. The notified bodies are going to come in, specifically look at your risk analysis and take a look at, see whether it's a dynamic document. They're going to look at your complaints. They're going to look at your vigilance reports. And they're going to look back to see whether that is a dynamic document or just something that's put on the shelf and stuck away. It's supposed to be there to be updated as new information comes in, whether it be from the literature, defining a new risk or a new use that you're not used to or haven't seen before, or a new failure mode that you haven't seen before. So I just wanted to follow up on that and say how important that document is as part of your technical documentation. Our next topic, thank you. Our next topic is the differences in the applicable EPs. Excuse me, I missed a slide. In the evaluators and clinical expert qualification. The competent clinical expert in TGA is someone with relevant medical qualification and direct clinical experience in the use of the device or device type in a clinical setting. Typically medically qualified and a practitioner in the specialty which will use the device, whether it be a dermatological device, a surgical device, a urological device, or an orthopedic device. The practitioner must have some kind of specialty or experience with the device and its use. It must be experienced in the use of the device in a clinical setting, have recent clinical experience, preferably within the last 5 years, and suitability may depend on the novelty of the device and recent developments within the field. That's a pretty strict definition of a clinical expert. In the EU, an evaluator should have at least the following training and experience in a relevant field, a degree from a higher education in the respective field, in 5 years of documented professional experience or 10 years of documented professional experience if a degree is not a prerequisite for a given task. On interest, excuse me, on declaration of interest, evaluators should check the clinical evaluation report, provide verification that it includes an accurate statement of their analysis and opinions, and sign the report. They should provide their CV and the declaration of interest to the manufacturer. That is, if they have direct interest in the sale of the device, if they own a portion of the company, or they buy the device. In TGA, it's a little different. The clinical assessor is to determine whether an appropriate clinical expert has been chosen. The full curriculum VT of the clinical expert should be included with any convergence of interest or potential for conflict with the manufacturer or the sponsor noted. Would you like to explain that a little bit in more detail, Arun? I think that's an important difference.
Yeah, sure, Shem. So let me explain you that the difference inside the competent clinical expert and the evaluator. So TGA, some of our customers just think that this evaluator and competent clinical expert are only the change in terminology, but no, I think as per my answer, it's no. The requirement of a competent clinical expert is different, and the requirement for evaluator, it's different. The competent in TGA is putting more effort, more focus on the clinical side, that the person need to have more clinical experience, more medical or clinical experience. He need to medically qualify. He need to have clinical experience, preferably within 5 years. That is more stringent requirement. And another, that depend on the novelty of the device. If a device is novel, then also that is depend on the device novelty. If the device is new to the market, then obviously a clinical expert cannot have like around 5 years of experience on that device, as the device is a new one. So that depend on the case-to-case basis for like novelty device or legacy devices, like well-established devices. So, but that person need to have sufficient enough clinical experience on that device. It has a requirement as well, like if the competent expert has a gap of more than 2 years in his clinical experience, then he need to give a justification that why those 2 years is a gap for his career. Then only he can be your competent clinical expert. So as per my understanding, TGA is putting more focus on the clinical side and medical side to being a clinical expert to review the clinical evaluation report. But if you see the MDR requirement, it's not very much clear inside the medical device regulation 2017-745, the requirement for the evaluator. But if in this situation we need to follow the MedDev guideline, the MedDev 2.7.1 Rev 4 guideline, then you need to see, then you can see in MedDev, the MedDev is putting a focus on the education and the experience and the professional experience. Means those experience can be related professional experience. Obviously he need he is mentioning that the professional need to have relevant experience, and and MedDev is more focused on the exact time duration of the experience. Means it's also stringent in terms of the experience, years of experience. If you don't have this much of years of experience, then you cannot evaluate a CER. So for MDR, you need to minimum of, if you have a 5 years of documented professional experience, then you can be an evaluator. Or if you don't have a documented professional experience, then you need to have a 10 years of documented professional experience. That if the degree is not prerequisite for the given task, then you can be an evaluator. So MDR is more focusing on the years of experience, whether the TJ is more focusing on the clinical and medical background of the person. And I don't think there is much difference in the conflict of interest, like MDR is telling about declaration of interest, whereas TGA CER is calling about convergence of interest. I can tell you these are the difference in terminology, but the requirement is very much similar. You can have the evaluator can provide the CV and his declaration of interest form with his proper signature. Here also the clinical competent expert can provide his convergence of interest, like conflict interest of potential to the manufacturer with a proper signature with his CV.
I would like to add a
Over
few
to Sam.
things, Arun and Sam, if you allow.
Sure.
So I think, Arun, thanks for explaining the requirement. I would like to caution that these are minimum requirements. What we have seen in last few years, and I'll be more practical of what we have seen. We have seen almost 30 to 40 CRs which were written by so-called experts. They were PhDs in their expert areas. They had more than 15 years of experience, and we were really wondering that why we are redoing these CRs. I think the challenge is that people have not put enough effort to understand the regulation. They may be expert in certain areas of CR. CR, let's say if it has 10 different sections, they may have pretty good expertise on 4 or 5 with their background, with their knowledge which they bring in of years of experience. But in the remaining 5, they are not really good, and that had been the reason that notified body has given them non-conformance or observation on those areas. So my suggestion would be that you make sure that your team is fully trained. They have enough understanding of the regulation. They also need to have an expert who is training them, just to make sure that the experts share the experience of facing notified bodies audits. It's very important. One thing is you're just following what is written in the regulation, and second, how notified bodies are interpreting. They may interpret differently than what you interpret, and this comes from years of experience and what you have seen in the market. So I think that becomes a real good practical intent, that somebody who has written CRs is training your team, who might have multiple years of experience and who will expect you to write CRs. It will be more productive if you do those investment upfront. Over to you, Sam.
Thank you. The next slide is the difference in applicable EPs to GSPRs. The essential principles are quite different, although much broader in scope in the TGA. The principle 1 is the use not to compromise health and safety, how the device is used, for example, the type of treatment administered or procedure or testing undertaken, and if there are any inherent dangers in this, all have implications on the safety of the device. Principle 3 must perform in the way the manufacturer intended. Principle 4 must be designed for the long-term safety, and the clinical evidence must demonstrate that the device performs as intended for the length of time appropriate to the intended purpose without adversely affecting the characteristics and performance. On the EU MDR side, you select a relevant GSPR requirement based on the subject's device. At a minimum, you select GSPR 1 and GSPR 8. GSPR 1 devices shall achieve the performance intended by the manufacturer and should be designed and manufactured in such a way that near normal conditions of use, they are suitable for their intended purpose. GSPR 8, all known and foreseeable risk, any undesirable side effects shall be minimized and acceptable when weighed against the evaluated benefits to the patient and or user arising from the achieved performance of the device during normal conditions of use. To go into this more detail, I'd like to turn it over to Arun to explain the other principles and the difference between the EP, and the GSPR. Arun?
Yep. Thank you, Shem. So, uh, if I will tell you, like in TGA, it's essential principles, it's EPs, and in MDR, it's GSPRs. Like earlier in directive in medical device directive MDD, it was only ERs, essential requirements. If TGA requirement is, if you'll see, the number of EPs are quite bit long, quite bit much, means 1, 3, 4, 6, 13, 14. So there are like 5 principles are there which you need to comply to create the clinical evaluation report. But in GSPR, if you are going with a minimum requirement, if your device is lower risk, and if your device if the GSPR and GSPR 8 is enough to comply the safety and performance of your device, then you can go with GSPR 1 and GSPR 8 only. So you can see, like there are only 2 requirements, so it's been easy. But no, my answer is that no. If you will see the actual requirement of essential principles, those are completely different than the GSPRs. The essential principle, the principle 1 is not to compromise health and safety. How the device is used, for example, the type of treatment administered or procedure or testing, like the intervention of the intervention of the device, how the treatment is going on, how the procedure or the testing are undertaken. So this requirement is a very basic requirement. Then you can it is only if you are complying with the performance, then it is included inside that. Then principle 3 must perform the way the manufacturer intended. It's only the performance requirement that you are already that is already inside the GSPR 1 only. Then principle 4 must be designed and manufactured for long-term safety. Means the clinical evidence must demonstrate that the evidence of the clinical, it's need to be in a way that it can demonstrate that the device can be used for a longer time period without adversely affecting the characteristic and performance. So this is also a requirement for safety. Then principle 6, benefits must outweigh undesirable side effects. So this is also a basic requirement where you need to define that your device benefits. You need to see your risk benefit analysis, and you need to evaluate your residual risks. Then after that, after evaluation of all your residual risks, then you need to claim that my device benefits are outweighing the undesirable side effect or the risk. So it's also a requirement of performance and benefit. Then principle 13, information to be provided with a medical device. These are all packaging all the packaging inserts, like it includes the IFUs, labeling, any IFU means instruction for use, any labelings, any clinician cards, any leaflets, any manuals, whatever is going with a device, that need to be there. And the requirement is quite there is a requirement for specific requirement for this packaging insert only. So it's also a basic requirement. Then principle 14, it's like overarching requirement. It's telling that you need to comply with all those above requirements, then you can comply with the clinical evidence. It's the complete overarching requirement for all the above 5 requirements. So every medical device requires clinical evidence appropriate for the use and classification of the device, demonstration that the device complies with the applicable provision of the essential principles. Means it's only asking you to comply with the above 5 principles, so that this principle 14 can be the clinical evidence can be demonstrated, can be complied. But when you need to see the GSPR requirement, the GSPR requirement is very critical. If you will go through the GSPR 1 requirement only, the GSPR 1 itself includes the device shall achieve the performance intended by their manufacturer and shall be designed and manufactured in such a way that during normal condition of use they are suitable for their intended purpose. Means it's contain performance, safety, long-term use, design and the design requirement, design and manufacture for a long-term use as intended by the manufacturer. So it includes like multiple requirements inside one requirement. Then if you'll go to GSPR 8, this foreseeable risk, this is a very much known term nowadays, new terms for medical device industry. Wherever you will go, like in ISO 14971, ISO this 2019 version, this 2019 version gave a very emphasis on this foreseeable risk to this word. So all known and foreseeable risks and any undesirable side effects shall be minimized and be accepted and weighed against the evaluated benefit to the patient and or user arising from the achieved performance of the device during normal condition of use. Means it includes their number of requirements are there inside one sentence. They are like, you need to comply with the on all known and foreseeable risks, the undesirable side effect. You need to minimize or mitigate all the acceptable risk when weighed against the evaluated benefit of the patient, and you need to arising from the achieved performance. So there are multiple requirements as combined inside one requirement. So this GSPR 1 and GSPR 8 itself is a bigger thing itself. It's a bulkier thing to comply with all these requirements. Then there are additional requirements, additional GSPR requirements are there. If your device is relevant to this additional GSPR requirement, then you need to add these GSPRs to your CER, like GSPR 5, GSPR 6, GSPR 14.1. If your device is like combination of medical devices, there are like your device is one and there are multiple devices are there, and you are combining two other devices, there is a multiple device combination, then you need to comply with GSPR 14.1. so like that there are different relevant GSPRs are there. So you need to comply all those relevant GSPRs. So you can think that how much it will be a bulkier task for you to comply all those requirements inside those GSPRs.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sam.
Can we go to the next slide, please?
Sure.
What have we learned today? What are the international standards and guidelines applicable to TGA and EU MDR compliant CERs? How you can select equivalent devices for TGA and EU MDR compliant CERs? What are the requirements of post-market data and post-market surveillance for TGA and EU MDR? The differences in the CEP requirements, CER update frequency, and device classification, and who can be the evaluators or clinical experts for your CER. Are there any questions that anybody might have that they would like to put to the panel?
Excellent. Thanks, Sam and Arun. So all the audiences I have unmuted, all of you. You can unmute yourself and ask the question. Yes. Or you can write your question and then we'll get an answer. So let me see. Some people have already asked questions. So let me go here. Okay, Arun, so Fatima has asked a question. He is from Invasive. So can you read his her answer and so question and answer? Are you able to see that?
Yes, I can see her question. Okay, so Fatima is asking, do we need to have a separate CER for Australia submission, or we can use the MDR CERs with minor modifications? To answer Fatima's question, you need to have a separate CR. Yes, you need to have a separate CR. If you are doing any minor modification, then it cannot be a next revision of your existing CR. It obviously apparently it can be it is a different CR. So if you are doing any minor modification, that then you can create a new CR, a different CR, which need to comply with the Australian requirement. Minor modification, I cannot tell what you are asking about minor modification, but you need to comply with the requirements, with the essential principle requirements of Australia and the other requirements of Australia. So you need to comply with all those requirements. Then only you can submit that CR to Australia. It cannot be a same CR. Obviously, it need to be a separate CR.
Just one point I would like to add, Arun, to what you have explained. So there is a huge difference between CER for Australia and MDR CERs. So there's a big difference, and you may be providing more additional content to Australian CER, TGA CER, if you are going to reuse MDR, because your data need is not that exhaustive. So many times it's good to provide more data, but be cautious. Providing more data can allow auditors to see more and ask you more questions. So as Arun said, it has to be a separate CR for sure. That would be the best. But at the same time, you will have to see the standards. Both standards are different. Some elements you can reuse, but there are quite a few elements which have to be rewritten for the specific TGA requirement.
Yes. Arun, there's a question. A person has asked if they have a biomedical engineering degree and 15 years of regulatory experience, can they author a TGA CER?
Yes, I can see this. Can a biomedical engineer by education with over 15 years experience of regulatory? Yes, here I can clear you one thing. Like Kuldeep explained in this in that our slide, that competent clinical expert and the evaluator slide, that these are the minimum requirements. And again, those evaluator and clinical competent expert are only they can only review the CERs. It is very difficult to write a CER. So to writing a CER, to having that much of experience is not enough to write a complete CER. To write a CER, you need to have experience on that certain regulation, on the certain requirements of that regulation, respective regulation. Then only you can write a exhaustive CER. Then you can review it by the competent clinical expert or the evaluator, so that it can be approved by your notified body or your auditor. So if the biomedical engineer having 15 years of experience, but if he has a potential experience of writing the CERs for TGA or MDR, if he has experience on TGA requirements, TGA regulation, to how to write a CER, then he can write a CER. But not just 15 years is enough to write a CER. You can review the CER, but it is difficult to write a CER.
Yeah, I would say it's the lack of clinical experience. It may be that they have 15 years of regulatory experience, but there was no mention of any clinical experience, which would prevent them from being a clinical expert under the TGA.
Excellent. So I have unmuted from my side all the audiences. If you would like to ask questions, you will still have to unmute yourself. You can unmute yourself, and then you can ask a question. There is a question from Prasanna. He's asking, what is the difference in criteria to select equivalent device between MDR CER and TGA CER? So I will assign that to you, Arun.
Okay.
Okay, I send this to myself. Okay, I send it to you now. Yeah. There you go.
Yes, now I can see. What is the difference in criteria to select equivalent device between the MDR CER and TGA CER? Yes, the criteria you need to in MDR, the requirement is more stringent. In MDR, you need to check that whether if the device is the same from the same manufacturer, like it's a predicate device, like it's a device of it's a modified device, then you need not to do much more. You need not to do any more thing. You just need to take the device as equivalent and you need to demonstrate the equivalency. But if the device is from other manufacturer, then that is a big problem in MDR CER. So at that point of time, you need to have an agreement with the other manufacturer. Then only you can demonstrate the equivalency with that device. But in the same time, if it is for TGA CER, for a device that is from other manufacturer, you need not do any more agreement. You can just take the device from the other manufacturer that is a similar marketed device, and you can demonstrate the equivalency by comparing the device with your subject device by technically, clinically, and biologically.
Excellent. There is another question from Avinash. He's asking what is the typical time frame for TGA CER compared to MDR CER?
Yeah, excellent question. So TGA CER, the update period for TGA CER, it's been not very much clearly defined inside the TGA guideline or TGA regulation. It's only defined like you need to update your CER from 1 to 5 years. The range is quite high, 1 to 5 years. And that too based on the risk, that too based on the inputs from your post-market data or benefit versus risk analysis. And also he is referring to MedDev 2.7.1 Rep 4 at that same period. Means when MedDev came into effect, MedDev has a very clear requirement for CR update. So MedDev tells us, for the MedDev 2.7.1 Rep 4 tells us that if your device is a new device or a device is high risk, then you need to update it annually. Means per year you need to update if your device is a new device or your device is taking a more higher risk. But if your device is a legacy device, that is well established device, and if your device has lower risk, then you can update it between 2 to 5 years. You can take according to its your discretion. So the same requirement also you are following in MDR CER, that if a device is new or taking higher risks, then you can update it annually. And if a device is a legacy or a well-established lower risk, then you can update it in 2 to 5 years.
Excellent. There are a lot of questions. Probably we cannot take all of them, but I'll just ask a few, Arun. Jim is asking if you have to do TGA CER for orthopedic devices, is there any difference between doing CER for orthopedic devices in Europe or in TGA?
Yes, sure. For which device, whatever the devices is there, if you are doing a CER for TGA, that need to be different from the European one. If you have already submitted a CER in European regulation and that was according to MDR, then you need not to be submit that MDR CER in TGA CER, and you cannot. The TGA CER requirement is different. There is a vast different, as Kuldeep told you earlier also, there is a vast different in between the requirement of MDR and TGA. The TGA requirement is quite bit less stringent as well. But there are few requirements are quite different. Here are essential principles. You need to comply with the essential principles. The complete CER we are writing to comply with the essential principles. Whereas if you are writing a CER for MDR, the complete CER is written according to that you need to comply with the general safety performance requirements, those GSPRs. So you cannot submit the EU MDR CER in Australia to get the approval in TGA.
Excellent, thank you. I think we have few more questions, but probably we can answer them one-on-one. I would like to see if somebody wants to ask questions on audio. So I have unmuted. If you have your questions, you can unmute yourself. You will still have to unmute yourself and ask question. For all the remaining questions we have received, we will send an answer in next few days. So you don't have to worry. Since we have a lot of questions, we're skipping some of the questions written, and we just wanted to say if somebody want to ask in the audio. Okay, sounds good. Over to you, Ankit.
Thank you, Kuldeep. Now I will share some polls for just as a feedback of this webinar, so that we can improve our quality in our upcoming webinars. So I will be looking forward for your feedback on these polls.
Do you have a question on your screen? Yeah, Ankit, go ahead. Sorry.
This will appear for 20 seconds, and then I will move to the next one. This will be really helpful for us. Okay, I'm moving to the next one now. So the next one is here.
So I think folks pay attention to these questions if you would like to hear more more from Sam and Arun.
Yeah. I will now move to next one. Okay. Next one. We will be really happy to help you out in writing down some TGA CERs. If you need some help, you can just drop an email to me. We will be happy to help. Okay, I will move to next one. Okay, I'm done, Kuldeep. Now you can just announce our next webinar as well. That, yeah.
Thanks, Ankit. So all the audiences, this is not the end of questions. So we will definitely answer, I think, 5-6 questions which are still remaining. We wanted to respect everybody's time. So we will send an email and answer your questions there. But others, feel free to ask any questions which might arise later on when you do TGA CER, and we'll try our best to answer your question. Arun, if you can just show me screen for the next webinar. So our next webinar is just before Thanksgiving on cybersecurity. So we will send out an emailer. So just to ensure that you join that. It will be, the topic would be how to integrate medical device cybersecurity expectation to your QMS. I think this is an important topic in general, as we are seeing that IT and the software systems are embedding into each and every medical device these days with artificial intelligence and big data and whatnot. So this would be a very interesting webinar where you will hear from another expert who is a renowned personality in the area, and he will also update about recent changes which FDA has brought in cybersecurity. So this is going to be on 18th November. Just mark the date at the same time. Typically, we have our webinars on 21st, but 21st November is Saturday, and a lot of people will be going off because next week is Thanksgiving. So we have preponed in particular this time to have it on 18th November. Okay, so I think that's all. There are no more questions, and we're looking forward to have you guys in our next webinar. So Ankit, if you can just do whatever you're supposed to do to end the webinar, and that'll be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Kuldeep. Arun, can you move to next slide so that people can note down the mail IDs and contact details for reaching out?
Yeah. Sorry, I missed this.
So,
very important information.
You can note down my mail ID and these contact details for reaching out to us for any help on TGA CERs and other CERs, and for quality management system reviews and any other help will be really happy to provide to our attendees. And thank you for joining us on this wonderful webinar. Thank you, Sam, for being such a lovely presenter, and thank you, Arun, for being there and providing some valuable answers to our attendees. Thank you, Kuldeep, for hosting the webinar very well. So good morning and good night, India. See you on our next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.